Good day, Gondag, Kasa Yugot. This is a video about computer games, in particular my top 5 favorite computer games of all time. And I'm not really sure who it's intended for, maybe the students from British and European cultural history at the University of Iceland, or whoever's interested. But I just thought it'd be a fun video to put together. It's about a topic that's been on my mind for a very long time. Computer games have been a part of my life going back to when I was 8 years old, I suppose. And plus I wanted to do one of these top 5 high fidelity style lists, because who doesn't love that kind of list? I have one for novels on my website, my top 100 novels. Well, I'm not sure if I have a top 100 computer games, but I can think of a top 5, and so that's what this list is going to be. Now, just to sort of put us into the mood, set the tone, should show you a couple of games I have here, collectible editions that I got off of eBay, brand new, unopened, but from the late 1980s. Anyone out there maybe remember the King's Quest series, the old Sierra adventure games? There you have King's Quest 2, Romancing the Throne, King's Quest 3, To Hair is Human, and King's Quest 4, probably the best of the group, The Perils of Rosella. And I love that the designs of these are all the same. They basically all follow the same format, though you can see that the images each tell a story of their own. See the back of the boxes, and I got these, as I say, off of eBay, mostly just for reasons of nostalgia, because these are the games that I grew up playing. These were those early PC games. In my grade school, we had something called computer class, where you'd go into a computer lab and you'd have boxes of these games, crack them open, play them off of the disc. And I also owned some of these, I believe King's Quest 3 and to some of the Space Quest games as well. So this really takes me back into the past, and these are some of those memories. I mean, the memories of playing these games, I mean, they're good memories, right? And not all of the memories from the past are positive, so it's worth going back to those good memories. And I think there's this sense, too, of owning these games. I mean, when you look at games today, with everything being online and you download everything, it's very rare that you actually have the physical product, the tangible kind of thing that you can hold in your hand. I mean, that's sort of fallen by the wayside a little bit. So this is kind of getting these games, it takes me back to a time where there was really that sense of childish wonder. The idea that contained in this box, and you would get these, or at least I did, at Christmas or for my birthday, you would get these boxes, and there's this sense that an entire world is contained inside, a world of intrigue and mystery and drama just waiting to be opened up. I mean, let's face it, a better world than the one you're familiar with. And so there's that aspect too to owning these. But I should show you actually my favorite one of all the ones I got, also off of eBay, sealed, brand new edition of Starflight. Anyone remember that game from, I think, 1986? This edition would have come a little bit later because it has 3.5 discs inside of it, from Binary Systems, and I think this might have been the first computer game that I ever owned. In fact, I still have the edition that I own, minus the discs, which I lost somewhere. But Starflight, I mean, what a punishing game this was. I mean, it was just so difficult. I mean, for kids, and I think probably for adults as well. It was one of those permadeath kind of games where once you die, it just completely ends your run. You die suddenly and absolutely, and you have to start all over again. There are all sorts of quick, easy ways to die in Starflight. There you see the kind of Star Trek theme of the game. And it makes me think of a kind of division that existed when I was younger. This would have been in the late 80s and early 90s, between computer games on the one hand and video games on the other. And this was right around the time when Nintendo was starting to become a thing, when we get into the early 90s. And so many kids I knew at school owned a Nintendo and later Sega Genesis and a Super Nintendo. And so they all had video game systems. Well, I did not have a video game system. I had computer games instead. And there was this crop of kind of nerdy, geeky, outcast kids who would play computer games instead of video games. Because computer games were associated with things like puzzles and strategy and taxing your mind. I guess some video games did those things, but computer games kind of more aggressively. Computer games were almost associated with school, right? Hence the reason we had computer class in school, but not video games class, whereas video games were more action-oriented and more about instincts and reaction. And so there was that division at the time. I guess they've since blurred together, but Starfight really epitomized that division, because I would have kids come over and they would play Starflight, and the reaction would be, this game is so unenjoyable, right? It's just not fun by the standards of what we're used to, but that must have set a tone. The desire to play a difficult, superficially unenjoyable games. And as I go through the list, the top 5 list, I guess you can say that becomes a theme. And also one other thing, the science fiction theme as well. Starflight, of course, has a heavy sci-fi theme, and I've always loved science fiction, and you see that influence in the list here, the top 5 list. Of course, it's always interesting the way these things stay with us. I mean, our interests are established sometimes at such an early age. So let's get into it. My top 5 favorite computer games of all time. Should point out, of course, that this is just my personal list. And I'm very happy to start with this first game, because to my mind, this game establishes a theme that carries over for the entire list that I'm going to be working with here. For one thing, the first game I'm going to look at is a game that I've been playing recently, so it's fresh in my mind, and I haven't finished the entire game. I finished the first main campaign, the original game, but there's also a lengthy extension which I believe was designed by other players, so other fans of the game, which is kind of cool. So I guess you could say it's fresh in my mind. It's a recent game, which is a theme in this list. But the other thing that this first game sets up is the idea that you don't need flashy graphics, bells and whistles, a killer soundtrack, a captivating story, big budget. You don't need any of those things to create a great computer game. That there are other things that go into making a good game. And that's certainly true for number 5 on my list, because rest assured it doesn't have any of those things whatsoever. In fact, I'd have to say there's something sort of almost contrarian about putting this game on my list, because it's exactly one of those games that you wouldn't necessarily think of as being obviously enjoyable on any kind of clear level, but I really like it a lot. So this is the first game we're going to be taking a look at here, and the name of the game is TIS 100 from Zachtronics, released in 2015. So Zachtronics is a small indie, or I guess they're bigger now, but they're an indie niche company. They make computer games which on the whole follow a similar format. They are puzzle games, and typically in a Zachtronics game, what you're asked to do is to complete a series of puzzles where you have to build a product of some sort. And the product varies depending on the theme of the game. It could be a structure made out of blocks, it could be a molecule, as in Space Chem, or it could be a sequence of numbers, as in TIS 100. You're given a series of ingredients and a series of commands, and you basically have to bring the ingredients and commands together to build a product of some sort. The kicker in a Zachtronics game is that you have to make the product not just once, but repeatedly. In fact, infinitely. You have to construct the product in this kind of unending loop. You have to build an assembly line circuit with your commands and ingredients where you're making the product over and over again. And many of the challenges in Zachtronics games come from building that circuit. So I have to admit right now to having an ambivalent relationship with the games of Zachtronics. I did play Space Chem and Infinifactory, which are two of their more popular titles, and I thought they were really brilliant games, each in its own way. But I quit playing them both. I didn't finish them because I found them maddening. I mean, they were too frustrating, and there were just too many rage quits. And eventually, I just didn't find them enjoyable anymore. So I thought that was it for Zachtronics. But I'd heard of TIS 100 or TIS 100, and I'd heard that it was the purest, most essential version of a Zachtronics game, a kind of really distilled version of the Zachtronics game. So I was curious as to what that might look like, and that's why I started playing it. I was not expecting to like it, but I did like it in the end. In fact, I loved it enough to put it on my top 5 list. So let's look at the reasons why. This is a game built in the mold of a Zachtronics computer game, but it is an IT computer programming themed game. Basically follows the mold of Zachtronics. You're asked to build a product, but here the products are just sequences of numbers. You get a string of numbers that come in here at the top. You have to use a series of programming commands to arrange them into these sequences, which you then output down at the bottom, and you use commands such as move up ACC, move ACC down, swap, save, move up ACC, just commands that you can find in the instruction manual, which reads more like a warning than anything else because it's so jargony and kind of opaque when you first encounter it. Now, what people were saying is exactly true. This is a pure and brutally minimalistic and stark game. I mean, that's what people mean when they say it's an essentialist kind of version of an Zachtronics game, because you can see here, you are essentially playing in variations of the same screen the entire game. You have this screen right here, which you can see is black and white, and this is where you have the different levels with their names: signal amplifier, sequence counter, sequence peak detector, image test pattern 2. And then when you go into the levels, you will see you're playing with variations of the same screen. All the levels basically look like this, except that this red block moves around a little bit, and there's a few variations that crop up later on. But basically, this is what you're going to be looking at the entire game, and it's just so minimalistic. I mean, it's black and white. It's text input. You have these blocks, what they call nodes, and you're working within them the entire game. There's no music. There are hardly any sound effects. There is a story which comes to you here through these red blocks, and it's an eerie, disturbing story about a computer programmer who becomes obsessed with a computer to the point of addiction, which is very kind of relevant to this game. And so the idea with this game is it offers you almost nothing in the way of eye candy or stimulation. It's almost the kind of game where it's whatever you bring to it, whatever mood you have, whatever mindset you're in. That's what you bring to the game, because it doesn't really provoke anything or give you anything. But on the other hand, having said that, this all contributes, I would say, to the atmosphere, the environment of the game. TIS 100 does a brilliant job of creating atmosphere through omission, through leaving things out, because it really is an idea of a computer programming IT world where it's so stark so limited, so confining and claustrophobic. There's this sense that you're just trapped in this narrow space, and there are very few things that you can actually do except write commands into these boxes. And I mean, these are the commands of assembly language programming. I mean, it's not even modern programming language at all. I mean, we're talking late 70s or early 80s, or whenever it's supposed to be from. So it really gets that sense of limitation, and I think it becomes a really really fascinating space to be in. Of course, an environment is one thing, but gameplay, I mean, that's where you really kind of judge a game. And I would say I love TSI 100's gameplay, although it too is maddening like the other Zachtronics games. It is a puzzle game in the sense that, as I said, you're basically given a series of commands. Here they are, all the different commands. You're given a bunch of numbers, and you're told you need to arrange those numbers into a certain kind of sequence. And once you start playing it, you see that the puzzles are really very ingenious and creative. And it is a game that taxes your mind in all sorts of different ways. There you can see running the circuit that I talked about before, where you have to output different sequences of numbers repeatedly over and over again. It's the kind of game where, yes, you have to think in a rigorous systematic way. You have to be logical, but you have to be creative and adaptable at the same time, because you're experimenting, you're trying out different things, different combinations of commands, moving them around between the different nodes. You really have the sense in this game of trying out a series of different kind of problem-solving abilities as you work through it. And it's the kind of game that captures a sense of progress. I think that this is one of the biggest issues with a lot of puzzle games, is they struggle with that idea. There are so many puzzle games where when you get stuck, you're just really stuck. I mean, this is true of some adventure games too. You just sit there staring blankly at the screen, looking for something that you're not seeing, and there's really this sense you can't move forward, you can't move backward, you're just stuck in place. But TIS 100, there's always that sense of a kind of incremental progress. You feel as though you're gradually inching forward with this game, because you're always trying out different combinations, deleting commands, rearranging commands, trying variations of what you were doing previously. So you do have that sense that you're inching slowly forward, and that's where the suspense, yes, this game does have suspense. That's where the element of suspense comes in, because you start to stress that you're not going to get the solution. When you feel yourself close, right, that's when you really feel, okay, now I almost have it. That's exactly where you worry that you're not going to get it. So it's a game that I think it brings in a kind of interesting element of suspense or putting you on the edge of your seat when you wouldn't think it would at all. This is the last level here, stored image decoder, where your goal is to write this image using the various commands. Now, I've heard it said that in order to play TIS 100, you should have a background in IT computer programming. Well, I can say that that's not necessarily true. You don't have to have that background, but I would say it certainly would help to have a background in IT programming if you want to play the game well. I mean, I think it's possible to finish it without having that background, but you're going to be kind of blundering through it, and a lot of your solutions are going to be lacking in what they call optimization. Optimization basically means doing more with less, and you're supposed to keep down these various numbers, such as your instruction counts. You're supposed to use less instructions to complete the puzzles. Well, that wasn't always possible for me. Sometimes I was just, as I said, blundering along, looking for a solution, using as many instructions as I possibly could. So it's not just a game for people who have a passion for programming, although I suppose that would help. And I would say anybody can get a sense of pride and gratification through playing TIS 100. And that is especially true of this level right here. I have to show this level, the second to last level in the entire game, Sequence Sorter. If anyone has played TIS 100, they probably remember this level, Sequence Sorter. What an unbelievable epic pain this level is. Your goal is to sort the sequence. Basically, you get a string of numbers there, and you have to arrange them in order from lowest to highest. So there you see, first sequence up to 0. You get your 67, 27, 86, 15, and you have to arrange it to 15, 27, 67, 86. Sounds simple, except you can only add and subtract numbers. You can only save one number at a time. And there are just so many other constraints. You have to play the game to fully understand what the constraints are. I don't know how many hours I sunk into playing this level before I finally came up with a working solution. Here it is. Here is my solution. This is not showing much in the way of optimization. You may notice that I am using every single line in these nodes. Every single space is occupied with these commands. And I think I actually need them all for my solution, which I don't think even works all of the time, right? Just most of the time. But this is one of those instances where I don't care about optimizing the solution. I was just happy to have something that actually worked, that finally worked. And as I say, most of the time it does. Go to the end, Sequence Sorter completed. As I say, I felt definitely a sense of pride and gratification when I finished that level. And I think that that's one of the things that makes TIS 100 really, in some respects, a great game. It gives you that sense of accomplishment when you complete it, or when you complete one of the levels. And that, I think, is the sign of a really great game. So there you have it, my fifth favorite computer game of all time, TIS 100, Zachtronics 2015. So, coming back with my fourth favorite computer game of all time, and I'm happy to include this one on the list as well because, like TIS 100, I'm still in the process of playing it, but also that this is an adventure game, and this is the only real adventure game that I have on this list, and I'm happy to include one because I did grow up playing those adventure games, the original Sierra adventure games like the King's Quest games, Space Quest as well. In fact, I was tempted to include one of those on the list, maybe King's Quest 4 or King's Quest 6, which came a little bit later. Space Quest 3, that was another one that I really liked in the past. But I have to go with this game, which is more contemporary, 2019, just because this really is my favorite adventure game. The name of the game is The Outer Wilds from Annapurna. What a wonderful, just magical space this game brings you into. Just such a fantastic, brilliant adventure game. Now, this is also a science fiction game, so that introduces that idea as well. Basic premise of this game. You are the member of an alien species. You have your home planet. You have a star system, a solar system. And your task is to explore that star system, go to a variety of different planets for the purposes of gathering information about an alien species that lived in the past. And there you can see, opening scene, there's you, or what your alien species looks like, one of your companions, I should say. There's one of the planets up there. And in the sense that you have to go to these various planets, there's this feel of compartmentalization to this game, which I've always liked in adventure games, because it makes me think of King's Quest VI, that was a game that was split between different islands that you would explore, or Space Quest 3, which was split between different planets that you would explore. And that's like the Outer Wilds. You get a series of different planets. They have different coloring. There you see a green one. There's your home planet over there. You got a blue one over there. Somewhere over though, you have a red one and a gray one. And you have these different planets. They have their own unique quirks and features, their own different hazards. Each one is really a world unto itself, just there waiting to be explored. That sense of mystery and adventure is really present in this game. But this is a game that is all about the story that you're putting together. And in that sense, I would say it's really quite a kind of unique experience, because this is a game where it's not really the purpose of it to just kind of beat or to finish the game. Although there are ways that you can do that, it's really much more a game that's about piecing together a narrative over time. I'll show you this over here, this computer, which contains a series of entries, and these are basically threads of the story that you're gradually accumulating over time. You can see this is still in progress, still in the purposes of playing it. That's what that question mark means. But the pieces of the story are contained in the environment that you're exploring. They're contained in these scrolls, these scripts that you find that have been left by this alien species that existed in the past. Some of them are right out there in the open. Others you really have to dig for to find. But you can see here, this is giving you a sense of how the different threads of the story that you find are all interconnected. It all is woven together, it's pieced together, and it's a story that is about a quantum moon and something called the Eye of the Universe and this extinct species from the past. And it's such a delight to kind of plunge into this narrative. I mean, you look at the stories in many games, and how often there's that sense that the story is just the equivalent of a kind of grade B movie, or the story is sort of plunked in this sort of clumsy way into a series of cutscenes. Not so with the Outer Wilds. This is really the kind of game where to play the game is to experience the story, and that's what keeps you motivated. That's what keeps you going as you work your way through the game, because this is really about advancing the story. That's the purpose of playing the game. And also, it's just such a wonderful environment, such a wonderful atmosphere you're in. I mean, you can maybe get a sense of it just from what I'm playing right now. Just these different areas to explore as you go through it. It is, in many respects, a kind of interestingly solitary game. There you see an example of one of the scrolls, because although you have, other characters that you meet along the way, they don't really play a big role except to kind of give you access to more information. This is, underneath it all, a game that is just about yourself up there alone with the stars, alone with the different planets. And I think that that's really the appeal of the game. I mean, sci-fi fans, who hasn't dreamed of this kind of experience of just this space you're in this kind of broken down jalopy of a spaceship, just exploring on your own, looking at, for instance, an ancient abandoned city. And at the same time, there's really that kind of a sense of almost whimsy to the game. I mean, you saw a little bit at the beginning, there's this kind of a camping theme to the game. There's this feeling of just a sense of wonder, but also to a degree a sense of relaxation, that you're just taking a break from the hustle and bustle of the world around you to enter into this space of exploration with this really interesting narrative that you're discovering along the way. So I think just a brilliant, such a fun game in so many respects. I might actually be inclined to rank it a little bit higher, but I would say if I did have a quibble with this game, it might be with the gameplay. There are aspects of the game, difficult things you have to do in the game, which feel, I would say, kind of a bit finicky in a way. You might find yourself sort of repeating the same task over, over and over again. And I mean, to be fair though, the designers do recommend that you use a gamepad, and I'm basically sticking to using a keyboard, which maybe is a little bit confining at times, but I would say that that's just a minor quibble. For the most part, the game is just an absolute delight to play. So, The Outer Worlds, Annapurna, released in 2019, my fourth favorite computer game of all time. So, moving on then to my third favorite computer game of all time. And now I would say we're starting to get down to it. I suspect there will be some people out there who will probably sit up straight when I say the name of this next game. If you've ever played this game, you'll probably respond to it, react to it on some level. The name of the game is FTL, Faster Than Light. Subset Games released in 2012, and Subset Games is another kind of indie company. They've only made, as far as I know, 2 games. You have FTL, Faster Than Light, and you also have Into the Breach, which came out in 2018. And this is really a story of quality over quantity, because both of those games I think are fantastic. The biggest problem with Into the Breach is that it is not FTL. What a game this is, Faster Than Light. I mean, anyone out there been addicted to this game? Because it has a whole bunch of addictive qualities to it. So the premise of the game, you are the captain of this spaceship that you see here on your screen. You are a Federation captain, and you're basically in the process of fleeing from a rebel fleet. There's a rebellion going on in the galaxy that you're in, and this rebel group is looking to take things over, and you're flying on the part of the Federation, so the government, and you have to rush to a home base because you have vital information. And you can see here, basically what you're doing in the game is jumping between these different sectors while the rebel fleet pursues you. You see here we have Sector 1, so this is the beginning sector. There are a total of 8 sectors overall, and it is a game where you are basically going to be engaged in combat most of the time. Now, the thing with this game is it has a little bit of that sort of affinity, I would say, with TIS 100 in the sense that it's quite stark and minimal in some respects. I mean, it's the kind of game where, for the most part, you're basically playing it in the same screen. You have this top-down view of your spaceship, and this is essentially what you're going to be looking at for the entire game. It's quite sort of rigid and static in that sense, and you can see your crew moving about in this space. So you almost have the sense that it's confining and limited in a way. But this is a game which is almost like a case study in that idea I mentioned previously, that you don't need a lot of bells and whistles or flashy graphics or any of those things to make a great computer game. This is a game that is about space combat, and it even has that element of being a flight simulator, because you are essentially going to be fighting against enemy ships, so engaging in space combat throughout the game. But there's nothing in the way of your usual kind of movement and action. I mean, you look at the combat sequences here when another one comes up, and you can see that you don't even control your ship. You're not even, weaving it around, ducking and dodging when you're involved in these encounters with enemy ships. You're just looking down on the screen and you fire your lasers or your missiles or whatever you have, and you can't really aim them. There's none of that sense of the speed and movement of playing the game. As I said, it feels strangely static in a way. But this is a game that will have you absolutely on the edge of your seat once you start playing it. This is a game that captures the art of suspense because it's not about speed and movement and action. It's about strategy. It's about the management of your crew, which you can see in this top-down view of the ship. You can move your crew around to different sectors. I actually lost one of my crew members through a silly decision I made. You see you have them there working your different systems. You have your weapon systems, your engines, you have your doors and your sensors, all of that stuff. And it's a game where the way you manage these different systems, the way you manage your crew, the way you tackle enemy encounters, this is going to determine how successful you are in the game. And a very important aspect of FTL is that it is a roguelike game. So when you die, that is basically it. You don't carry anything forward from one run to the next. There's nothing you can really save from one run to the next. So you have to be very careful when you're on a run about how you handle any given situation. And there's this push and pull in the game between being aggressive, if not reckless, and also being cautious. There are so many times where you're going to be tempted to take on another enemy ship because that's how you get scrap. You can see that number up there. That's how you accumulate scrap, and that's what allows you to do things like upgrade your weapon system or upgrade your engines or do other things. So it's always beneficial to take on an enemy ship, yet there's always risk involved in taking on the enemy ship as well. So you're constantly striking that balance of, do I attack this person or not? Do I attack this pirate? Do I attack this rebel, or do I back off from the fight? Do I go to that extra sector, or do I decide to jump out of the system as quickly as possible? And so often you get caught up in being a little bit greedy, being a little bit reckless, because that's always the temptation in this game. You need more scrap. You need to upgrade your weapons. You need to upgrade your engines. You need to buy new systems. And the further you progress, you can get things like cloning devices or mind control devices, and so you always want to push it a little bit further, but then if you do that, there's always going to be the risk that you're going to come up against a fierce enemy who is just going to take it to you. And as a roguelike game, as the kind of game where death happens suddenly, abruptly, I mean, this is a game it's like life in a way, right? You'll be going along, cruising along, great, everything is perfect, you feel wonderful about where you're at, and then suddenly it's all going to hell. You're getting shot up, half your crew is dead, your ship is on fire, and then in the space of a minute it's all over. That's it, you're done, you died. That will happen to you as you play FTL. It's a game that swings against you so abruptly and so suddenly, and it's thrilling, it's exhilarating, it's maddening. And the thing with this game too is, although there's that kind of element of luck involved in it, when you die, it really is always your fault. You can always go back to that critical mistake you made. You shouldn't have jumped into that sector. You should have bought a cloaking device instead of mind control. There's always that mistake you made somewhere along the way, and there's always that kind of feeling of regret. So although there is, as I said, the element of luck and contingency, there's also that sense of it really is up to you in terms of how you manage things, how you handle the game. That's going to determine whether you make it or not. Finally, I think the last thing to mention about FTL is the story. I mean, it's certainly not like the Outer Wilds. You're not getting a big elaborate story here. It's really pretty basic. You're just playing on the side of the government. You have this rebel fleet. It's kind of this good guys, bad guys feel to it. But that's kind of part of the environment of the game, I would say there's a sense that the Federation, the side you're fighting for, is really a kind of precarious entity. I mean, when you start to progress through the game, you'll meet all sorts of different alien species, and all of them, almost all of them, will be hostile to you just for the hell of it. But you have this feeling of a kind of lawlessness in this game, the feeling that the government is few and far between, that it's just you out there in this rickety spaceship that might get destroyed at any moment, and there's really no help for it. You're just out there on your own. Well, actually, the last thing I should also mention is the replay value of FTL. Unfortunately, I lost some of the runs I went through previously because I had to shift to a different computer, operating system was out of date, etc. But one of the great things about this game is you can play it repeatedly over and over again because there's so many different ways you can approach a run through the different sectors, and as you progress you get different ships that you can work with. This is basically the base ship, the one you're looking at here, but you get to experiment with different alien species. Here I'm playing with the humans, but you have different aliens. You have a rock species, a species that are like these big rock creatures, and you have a kind of mechanical species and a species that's like a giant insect, and they all have their interesting strengths and weaknesses, and their ships have different strengths and weaknesses. But you can also experiment with just different combinations of weapons, different combinations of special augmentations that you can install. So even though you run through the game and you're basically running through the same sectors, except that it's a roguelike, so these encounters are all randomized, so you never know what you're going to encounter from one to the next. But basically, the overall trajectory of the game remains the same. But there's so much replay value, even after you beat the game, because you want to try out just different combinations, different ships, different strategies to work your way through the game. There you see completing just the first sector. There briefly you saw the different sectors that are available. And as I say, every run is different, even though the sectors basically follow the same format, but all of these encounters are randomized. Roguelike, so you don't know what you're going to get from one sector to the next. So it's a game that you will come back to repeatedly in many ways, and not just because you died, right, to play it again, but also because it continues to hold your interest long after you've beaten it for the first time. So FTL, my third favorite game of all time. So take a little bit of a brief break here and come back with numbers 1 and 2. So coming down into the stretch run, now we have top 2 computer games of all time. And I have to say that for a very long time, my number 2 game on this list was the number 1 game, going back decades, even back into the 1990s. I loved this game when I was 13 years old. That's when I was playing it, and I still love it today, although it's been several years since I played it. So this is the kind of game that just absolutely stands the test of time. It was only really, I think, in the last year or so that a different game, my number 1, supplanted it. I think it's a good thing when that happens. It shows that things change and evolve over time, but this particular game still has that kind of pride of place, still resonates with me even today. An older game, but by no means out of date, and has certainly stayed in my imagination all this time. The name of the game is TIE Fighter from LucasArts. So this game released, I think, in 1994, 1995. There were some extensions that came after it. The special edition came out in 1998 with the complete storyline and also with improved graphics. So this game, well, if you like Star Wars, and I do, then you might like this game. And if you like flight simulator type games or space combat games, and I do, then you might like this game. Also, if you ever played X-Wing, which was a great game in its own right, and the precursor to TIE Fighter. So TIE Fighter is actually a sequel. Well, if you enjoyed X-Wing, then you might like this game. And finally, if you've ever been attracted to the idea of fighting on the side of the Empire, and I'm sure many people have had that thought of being stationed aboard a Star Destroyer, or maybe the Death Star, for a little while, of course. If that's ever appealed to you, then yes, you might like this game. But even if you take those different parts, you can see the potential of TIE Fighter as a game, but this is the kind of game that overfulfills its potential. This is a game that delivers in, I would say, an incredibly unique way. So the game, you are fighting on the side of the Empire. You get to fly the TIE Fighter ship, but also some other ships that are associated with the Empire. And immediately when you start playing this game, you have that sense of being involved in those combat sequences from the Star Wars universe, some of the great sequences from the early films like A New Hope or Return of the Jedi. All the speed and the excitement and the thrills of those space battles, they're all here in this game, but that's just the starting point. This is a game where you think about other space combat games, and how often is it the case that your objective, your goal, is just basically to blast as many ships as possible. You're just supposed to destroy as many enemies as possible. Well, not so in TIE Fighter. You're going to lose if you attempt to do that. You're going to lose in part because you're flying, after all, a TIE Fighter ship. And as we all know from the Star Wars films, TIE Fighter ships are just basically flying eggshells. I mean, they're sort of just cannon fodder, right? They're just here to get destroyed, and that's true in this game. A lot of your ships are just incredibly vulnerable, but you're also going to lose because the purpose of most of the missions is not just to destroy the enemies. The purpose is also to do something like to protect another spaceship or to capture a fleeing ship. The objectives of the missions tend to be fairly in-depth and also at times quite complex. And so you have to go into these missions with a plan in place. You have to have some kind of a strategy for how you're going to approach them. And that becomes truer as you progress through the game. As the missions become more intricate, you need, again, more of a strategy, a kind of a plan of action in advance, and you'll spend time outside of the game thinking about how you should approach a particular mission. Should I take on these enemies first? Should I defend that ship? Should I defend that platform? It becomes quite an involved game in that sense. And so there are just so many different layers to the gameplay, layers to the different combat missions, the different possibilities within it. Also, I should mention the balance of difficulty and challenge in this game. If there is a complaint with TIE Fighter, it might be that the original version of the game, so that basically consists of the first 7 battles, the original version is somewhat easy. At least the primary objectives are quite easy. Now that does change with the extension. I mean, there are some other missions which are remarkably difficult, but even in these early missions, you still have different objectives that you can pursue. You can see here, you have your primary goals. One of them is complete. You also have your secondary goals, and you also have bonus goals, which are hidden once you get into the missions. You can't actually see what the bonus goals are, but getting all of these, that's a kind of a deepening level of difficulty, and some of the secondary goals are very challenging, and some of the bonus goals are just incredibly challenging. I mean, that's true, especially when you get into something like Battle 5. there, I would say fulfilling the bonus goals, I mean, it's as difficult as anything you would do in a computer game. In addition to the gameplay in TIE Fighter, which is fantastic, you also have the storyline as well. And here we can form a kind of a contrast to other space combat or even any kind of action-oriented game. How often is it the case that the storyline of a game might be interesting and compelling, but it will sort of be dropped into the game in a clumsy way where you'll have these cutscenes that happen a little bit off stage. It doesn't feel like they're really integrated with the gameplay, and the cutscenes are how the story advances. I mean, that tends to be the norm, especially with space combat style games, but not so with TIE Fighter. This is a game where you have the feeling that the story is kind of woven into the gameplay. There are really not many cutscenes in this game. I mean, there are a few, but not a whole lot of them. For the most part, the story is being told through the instructions you receive before every mission. You speak to your commanding officer, and he tells you what the basic gist of the mission is going to be and what you're supposed to do. But he also explains why you're doing it. There's always that sense of purpose and meaning. So you have the idea that by flying a mission, you're advancing the story, because every single mission is linked together. One mission leads into the next one, and the missions all contribute to a larger battle, and the battles all form this comprehensive whole. So you're caught up in this interconnected narrative as you're going through, and you always feel as though it's as I said before, that you're moving the story forward as you go into combat. So action and narrative are kind of just blended together in a way that I think is just really unique. And the story itself, I mean, this is a story that is worthy of the Star Wars universe. And that's not true of all games or spin-offs of Star Wars. But the story here, it's not the kind of story you get in A New Hope or The Empire Strikes Back, where everything is kind of big and happening on this huge scale, where every kind of event is absolutely instrumental to the future of the galaxy. I mean, you know, we have to rescue the princess off the Death Star, right? The fate of the entire galaxy is hanging in the balance with this one action, and so too with everything else. You do have some of those things in a TIE Fighter, but for the most part, the story you're experiencing is kind of the story of the trenches of the war. You get more of the kind of minutia. If you've ever wondered what happens between the Battle of Hoth and the Battle of Endor, just with the war that's going on between the Empire and the Rebellion, which you only see in kind of snippets as the main characters go through the whole, all the stuff they're involved in. Well, this is a game that answers that question. It brings you into that world where you just feel like a run-of-the-mill pilot for the Empire, caught up in this galactic struggle for supremacy, and you're just flying these individual missions, and you can see the bigger purpose. You see yourself moving towards the Battle of Endor, the famous kind of empire-breaking moment, but you're caught up in these missions that sort of happen at the margins, as it were. But the story is still one of intrigue, fascination. I mean, you have piracy, you have defection, you have betrayal, you have new technology, people selling out to the rebels. I mean, it will just draw you in. It's as exciting, as compelling as anything that you discover in the Star Wars world. So, for those reasons, for a very long time, I thought of TIE Fighter as being my single favorite computer game of all time, and you're a perfect game, and one that certainly has stood the test of time. But as I say, things can change over time. Nothing stays the same. Nothing remains just kind of just static. And there is this idea that I've since moved on, because like I said, not so long ago, I would have said for sure that TIE Fighter is my favorite game of all time. But that changed over the course of the last year. And I guess these things are always subject to change. But for now, I feel fairly confident in saying that as of now, as of today, my favorite computer game of all time is a different game. No question about it. May 2022, my favorite game of all time is Baba Is You. Baba Is You, released in 2019. Arvi Teikari, who is a Finnish designer, I like that kind of Nordic connection, was the designer of this game. So, this game, Baba Is You. Well, this game features what you might describe as a pixelated kind of retro graphics. It kind of looks like the sort of game that you could play on an old CGA computer, and there's a limited amount of control or input. I mean, basically you control this white sheep character, I mean, for most of the game, and all you can really do is move back and forth and up and down. Oh, and you can undo your moves, and you can also restart the level. So that's basically it in terms of what you can do on the level of gameplay. And I don't recall that there's really any story in this game except the basic idea that you're a sheep trapped on this island, and you have to go to these different places, and you have to progress through them. And the music in this game is, well, it's decent. I don't think it's anything special. So you can see right from the start, Baba Is You is not an obvious choice, and yet nonetheless, without question, this is my single favorite computer game of all time as of now, because this is a game for pure puzzle fanatics. It is a puzzle game, and there are a lot of puzzles you have to solve. Basically, the setup: you have one level for one puzzle, level like this. As I say, you control your character moving the directional keys, and for the most part, you are asked to capture this flag, although, as I'll explain in a moment, the kind of purpose within that is to capture anything that is associated with the word a win. You can see there you have a series of phrases on the board which basically dictate what you can do. You can see down there, wall is stop. That means the wall stops me. I have freedom of movement, except that I can't run through the wall. You see down there, rock is push. That means I can push the rock. Flag is win. That means if I step onto the flag, I win the level. And also, importantly, Baba Is You. There you see it right there, basically determining that I am Baba. But the key innovation of this game is that you can change these commands, because you can push the words that make up the phrases, and you can arrange new words as you go through. So let's say instead of rock being pushed, I want the wall to be pushed. So spell the phrase wall is push, and now look, I can push the wall. Now notice also I can no longer push the rock because it's not linked up to any word, but I could, if I want, form the phrase rock is stop, and now the rock is behaving like the wall was behaving previously. I can't run through the rock. I can change my identity if I want to. Let's say I'm tired of playing the role of Baba. I want to be the wall instead. Well, look, now wall is you, now Baba is you. If I break that up, you can see there, I no longer have any control whatsoever, and I can move around freely like this as the wall. Another level, take a look at this here. See, wall is stop. But if I break this up, wall is no longer stop. You can see typically flag is win, but let's say I want the wall to be win instead. I want to win by stepping on the wall. Well, I can do that just fine. I turn the wall into win, step on the wall, and there you go. And I think right from the start, you can appreciate the different possibilities of this game. You can see the kind of creativity that's possible here, the different ways you can experiment with various combinations. Here, wall is you, so I am the wall, flag is stop, but I can break that up easily enough. Let's say I want to be the flag and the wall at the same time. Well, that is actually something I can do if I want. Just move the words around. And now I am both the flag and the wall at the same time. So, as I say, you can see the potential that's here, but it's kind of like TIE Fighter. The potential is fulfilled in a way that would exceed even your loftiest expectations. This game features over 200 levels in the original game. I recently discovered that they also added an extension. I'm not sure how many levels they ended up adding total, but I think it's a lot, which is a very kind of exciting development. Over 200 of these levels, you see some of them listed here, and it is just one pearl after another. It is just a sequence of gems. I mean, even the easier levels will just leave you delighted with how innovative they are, the ingenuousness of them, the thought that goes into them. The more difficult levels will force you to think in all sorts of different ways. You'll have to think in a rigorous way, in a logical way, in a systematic way, but you'll also have to think in a creative way. You'll have to be flexible. You'll have to think outside of out of the box to complete the levels. And the more difficult levels, the more stringent levels, if you're like me, you will sink hours into them, just hours and hours, searching for a solution that you know is there and yet you're not seeing. Here's one of those levels I remember spending a long time on, Heavy Cloud. I won't play it through, don't want the spoiler, but there you see the kind of list of all the commands, the different phrases set up there, and notice with the wall, there's some of them you can't meet, but here you can see an interesting stack of words, which I can break up, move this way, see, cause that to fall, move that to fall. Now I can't really do anything, so I have to start over again. This was one of those levels that it took a long time for me to play it through, trying out the different combinations. And there were others too. The Return of a Scenic Pond, that's one I remember. Or also, how about this one? Those who have played Baba's You may have a memory of this level, the floatiest platforms. Are you kidding me with this level? I mean, I don't even want to think about how much time I spent trying to work this one out. And I think part of the beauty of Baba Is You is that a lot of the time the levels are quite simple looking. I mean, it's not like most puzzle games where a difficult level is a busy level, where there's just a lot of stuff to look at and a lot of stuff that you have to do and keep track of. I mean, this level, the floaties platforms, it looks fairly simple. You are two of these Babas. You can see the command at the bottom, Lonely Baba's Defeat, basically means I can't step off the tile. I can push the rock around. I can break this up. There I can't win it because it's in the wrong position. Basically, I have to get the key, move it to the door, and open the door. So it's sort of minimal in terms of what it offers, and yet it was a level that I spent, I think, an inordinate amount of time working through, and there definitely was that sense of pride, gratification, when I actually came up with the solution. And I think the last thing to mention, that sense of progress, which I brought up with TIS 100, Baba Is You is a game that is exactly like that. You go through experimenting, trial and error, trying out different combinations, and you always have that sense of gradually, slowly, you're inching your way toward the solution. You can feel it coming closer, and it's almost always the very last thing you ever would have thought of. You have other ideas in mind beforehand, a different plan. Okay, I'll put the words together in that way, manipulate these objects, and hopefully this will work. But no, it doesn't work. Okay, let's try something different, and let's try something different again. And you go through the sequence, and eventually it's the last, most creative, most mind-bending, unlikely solution, the one that you never would have thought of when you first started playing the level. That's the one you eventually land on. And as I say, you will feel really quite fulfilled when you do so. Playing through Baba Is You, the original campaign, I might have looked up the solution for 5 or 6 of the levels, so I accept defeat with those, but I mean, it's worth it to keep plugging away at a level, as I discovered, and I think it's a wonderful thing that there's now an extension of this game, which I look forward to playing. I'm kind of putting it off. Some things you just want to sort of want to just continue to look forward to. So, Baba Is You, as of today, my favorite computer game of all time. And I think, again, the great thing is to have a list that's sort of in progress to think, well, there are other games I might discover sometime in the future. So, that's it. Top 5 PC games of all time. I hope it was an enjoyable video, and hopefully I'll make another video on a, well, completely different topic. Have a good day.